The article discusses the impact of climate change and the need for climate solutions. It highlights the extreme weather events occurring worldwide and emphasizes the urgency to address greenhouse gas emissions. The concept of working with nature instead of against it is presented as an innovative solution. Disasters. Exacerbating. Intensity. Mitigate. Innovative. Emissions.
Billions of people around the world are already suffering because of climate change. That's according to a recent report from the United Nations. Extreme weather disasters are happening with more intensity and more frequency in many parts of the world. And this year, it's been pretty hard to ignore.
It's been a summer of extremes.
This summer was the hottest on record, with heat waves in places like the U.S., Europe, and Japan.
Here in Austin, where I am, we've had 77 days of triple digits.
The ocean is a lot warmer than usual this summer.
How much is climate change exacerbating the threat of wildfires? Is this becoming a new normal?
Emissions from cars and power plants and factories have raised Earth's temperature, causing ice caps to melt, oceans to rise.
So what's being done about climate change around the world, and how long do we have to find solutions? This is a series about innovation and hope in the face of human-caused climate change, and the ideas, big and small, that could help mitigate the worst effects of a warming planet.
We still have time to avoid catastrophic climate change.
There is an innovative solution that's gaining traction.
It's a really successful implementation of an intervention.
The idea is to work with nature instead of against it.
All future generations can be benefited if we do what we can.
And who knows, maybe, we'll save the day because we still have time. That's the good news in this whole story. We still have time.
This is NPR Explains Climate Solutions. I'm your host, Camila Domonoske. Stay with us. So, how much time do we actually have to avoid the worst damage from climate change? Here's Rebecca Hersher from NPR's Climate Desk.
We, as humans, need to cut greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. And then basically cut them to zero by 2050. And I should say that first one, cut global emissions in half by 2030, that is achievable. It's not that far outside what current sort of policies and pledges and promises that people are saying around the world would get us to if everyone followed through basically on the things that they say they're going to do. So it's doable. There's definitely hope. There's always hope.
I sat down with Julia Simon, NPR's very own climate solutions reporter. She covers all the ways governments, businesses, scientists, and everyday people are working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I asked Julia to define what a climate solution really is.
Well, climate solutions can be renewable energy sources, things like solar, wind, plus batteries. These are things that reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Solutions can also come from government policies, like when President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act last year, the most significant piece of climate policy in U.S. history. We'll hear more about that later in this series. Another way to think about climate solutions is through accountability. Some individuals, companies, and places are more responsible for climate change than others. So how do we hold them accountable to help curb greenhouse gas emissions? Just look at Montana earlier this summer. A group of 16 young plaintiffs between the ages of 22 and 5 years old won a climate lawsuit that could have major implications across the U.S.
Right. Tell us more about that case.
So Montana's state constitution guarantees that current and future residents there have the right to a clean and healthful environment. This is a huge moment in climate litigation. There's a similar case in Hawaii, again led by young people, that will go to trial next summer. And according to a recent report from the United Nations, the number of climate-related lawsuits around the world has more than doubled over the last 5 years.
And how else are you thinking about climate solutions?
There is this word I keep coming back to, and that is co-benefits. And what it means is by creating climate solutions that work, not only will these solutions help curb greenhouse gases, but they might actually make life better too. Fossil fuels heat our Earth. They also cause pollution, and we know that disadvantaged communities are overburdened by that pollution. So if we replace coal and gas plants with renewables, then we can reduce greenhouse gases that warm our planet, and this is the co-benefit, we can cut pollution and make cities better for our lungs. Solutions can have many wins at once.
And what about adaptation, trying to cope with a warming planet? Is that considered a solution?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Climate change is here. Our coastal cities, for example, we need to rebuild infrastructure for rising sea levels. And we'll need to talk about new rainfall patterns, how to conserve water as we see more drought, and sometimes we'll see more rain. Adapting to climate change does not mean we're giving up. Adaptation is part of the solution. Again, there are these co-benefits. Planting trees in warming cities. It can provide shade, cool us down. Trees, they also store up carbon dioxide. Camila, I do need to make a point here, though, that on this topic of climate solutions, there's a lot of optimism. We also need to be mindful how we implement these things.
What do you mean?
Well, when we think about climate solutions, we need to consider equity, right? The tree planting, like if we just did it in rich neighborhoods as opposed to poor neighborhoods, that ain't helping us. Again, disadvantaged communities bear the brunt of pollution from fossil fuels. We've talked about this on NPR, especially in communities of color. Children are suffering from higher rates of asthma. There aren't enough green spaces. Cecilia Martinez, a former senior official at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, she said this on NPR in 2021.
The environmental justice community and many of our Black and Brown communities have identified the connection between climate change and their own community infrastructure. They can't be disconnected.
So climate solutions should not be repeating those inequities and injustices of the past. If more Americans turn to electric vehicles, for example, then how do we make sure that mining for those resources, for EVs and their batteries, is done in an ethical way? How do we assure that those mines aren't polluting water or they're siting mines on land that's sacred to indigenous communities?
Right. So these are examples of why you're saying equity needs to be top of mind right now.
Right, and this might feel like a monumental challenge, but Robert Bullard, he's a distinguished professor of urban planning and environmental policy at Texas Southern University, he says this is not the time to back away. He equates this moment to when our country faced other past injustices.
For example, slavery was an evil institution and it needed to be dismantled. I push back against any individuals or organization that will say, well, we can't do anything about this challenge. We can do something about it, but it would mean that we have to make up our minds that this is a challenge that we must address on a societal basis and on a global basis. And that's how we work on these problems and these challenges that have been so entrenched that some people have said that's the way it is. No, we should not and cannot accept climate change as the norm.
All right. So I heard him say we need to address this on a global basis. How does the rest of the world play into climate solutions? What are other countries doing about their carbon emissions?
Yeah, a country that comes up a lot in this discussion is China. And you're seeing the U.S. and China, the world's biggest economies, two of the world's biggest polluters, trying to work together. After diplomatic tensions, these two countries have tried to restart climate negotiations this year. We do know that China is increasing its use of fossil fuels. It builds more coal plants than the rest of the world combined. But the Chinese government says it will reach peak emissions before 2030 and cut emissions thereafter. And it's investing heavily in renewables, more than $500 billion last year. China also manufactures more solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicle batteries than any other country. According to the IEA, last year, 60% of all new electric vehicle registrations were in China.
And where else are we seeing changes?
Brazil's a good example. Earlier this year, the leftist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was sworn in as president. He narrowly beat far-right incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in a runoff election. And if you recall, under Bolsonaro, deforestation in the Amazon was surging. Lula took office, he immediately began operations in the Amazon to crack down on illegal mining and logging. Here's NPR correspondent Carrie Kahn in Rio de Janeiro.
He has gone all in on promoting himself as an international environmentalist and Brazil as being at the forefront and Amazon protection being on the forefront of battling climate change.
Carrie also notes it is a difficult road ahead. In recent years, Brazil's far-right government made lots of gains in Congress, and Lula will need to deal with Brazil's agricultural interests, which hold a lot of power.
He also has to make good on promises of economic prosperity. And that, if you look at the economy of Brazil, a lot of it is export-based with large soy, wheat, and cattle exports. And so he has this tension going on right now that he's dealing with. And it's one of those we'll have to wait and see how the environment fares with that struggle.
So, yes, there are a lot of challenges, but that's not meant to discourage us from seeking solutions. This really leads to this final point I want to make, which is that many climate solutions come from voters. We can absolutely think of democracy as a climate solution. There's this recent Pew Research survey that found that 2/3 of U.S. adults say the country should prioritize developing renewable energy resources. Democracy is important because if people want climate action, they can elect leaders who want climate action. But if a dictator, opposes climate action while the public wants it, that's a huge problem. Preserving democracy is a climate solution.
Julia Simon is the climate solutions reporter on NPR's Climate Desk. Julia, thanks for this.
Thank you, Camila.
Coming up, what Washington and local governments are doing to address climate change. This is NPR Explains Climate Solutions. I'm Camila Domonoske. Stay with us.